Welcome to our channel, where every story unfolds like a gripping movie filled with drama and surprises. Today, you'll witness the journey of a Black CEO who seemed to have reached the top, only to be betrayed by the very team she trusted most. From that moment, her career and reputation stood on the edge of total collapse. But instead of breaking down, she did something no one ever expected, and that single move shocked the entire world. Across 8 chapters of this story, you will feel everything, from anger and outrage to satisfaction and triumph. You'll see boardroom battles as tense as war zones, hidden schemes that will leave you breathless, and the lonely moments when trust was shattered. But above all, you'll witness how one woman transformed pain into power, turned betrayal into a stepping stone, and rose stronger than ever before. Get ready for a journey packed with drama, suspense, and raw emotion. If you've ever wondered whether someone can rise from betrayal to take it all back, this story will give you the answer. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the notification bell, because many more CEO stories, thrilling, inspiring, and full of twists, are coming your way. When people talk about a CEO, especially a Black CEO, they usually picture a powerful woman in a sharp suit, stepping out of a luxury car with a swarm of assistants orbiting around her. And yes, she once had all of that. A corner office as big as a luxury apartment, her morning coffee delivered at exactly 8:05 a.m., and a team of employees whose every response was a forced, "Yes, ma'am." Her company was in the world of financial technology, better known as fintech. In plain words, that means using technology to make financial services like payments, transfers, or asset management faster and easier. If banks were cold, slow stone, buildings, fintech startups were young, scrappy, fast-moving, and sometimes a little chaotic. She had built this company from nothing. And when its valuation reached hundreds of millions, with the coveted unicorn status, a startup worth over $1 billion, just within reach, she thought she had made it. That she had silenced all the doubters who once sneered, "A Black woman." As CEO, you've got to be kidding. But here's the problem. Success often blinds you. And in business, the knife in your back rarely comes from your rivals. It usually comes from the people who once toasted champagne at your side. The very team she trusted, slick men in shiny suits, brilliant at presentations, dazzling at PowerPoint slides, began whispering among themselves. They called it executive restructuring. Sounds fancy, doesn't it? But really, it was just a plan to push her out of the very chair she had built with her own sweat. The irony? In MBA programs, they teach about the agency problem, when the interests of managers and owners no longer align. What they rarely teach is something far more painful, when the very army you trained turns on you, because they see more profit in stealing your throne than in staying loyal. She discovered their plan by accident, not through a secret report or a hired investigator, but from a stray email missent to her inbox at 2 a.m. It contained a line. The post-CEO phase will be initiated next quarter. Post-CEO. What did that mean? It meant the company was already preparing to survive without her. She sat frozen in her office, the glow of the email burning in the dark, feeling both bitter and oddly amused. The company she had built from scratch was now whispering about life after her. How ironic. Instead of exploding in rage, she poured herself a glass of red wine and stared at the glittering city lights. One mocking line echoed in her mind, a saying popular among investors. It's always easier to replace the founder than to build the company. And that's when she realized the real battle had just begun. The next day, an executive board meeting was called. The glass-walled room on the 28th floor was designed to scream power and ambition. She walked in, heels clicking sharply on the polished floor, though inside her chest a storm raged. The entire team greeted her with smiles so fake they could have been printed. One of them, David, the CFO, spoke in a voice sweeter than artificial. "Sugar, our CEO looks absolutely radiant today. I believe our company is entering an exciting new phase." "New phase?" she smirked. In corporate language, new phase usually means someone's about to get pushed off the board. Then came Sarah, the head of HR, who once held her hand and cried during the startup days, now speaking like she was reading a press release. "We believe that for sustainable growth, the company needs a more flexible leadership structure. We should consider decentralizing power." Decentralizing. Such a noble-sounding word. But in reality, it meant splitting her authority into pieces for them to fight over. In business, this kind of maneuver is known as a corporate coup d'état, AAI compagnie coup. No tanks, no guns, just Excel sheets, PowerPoint decks, and backroom handshakes. But the consequences? Just as brutal as a real war. She listened in silence, letting them perform like bad actors in a cheap play. And in her mind, one thought echoed. "You think you're clever? Keep acting. I'll act better." After the meeting, she returned to her office. Outside, employees kept typing away, blissfully unaware that upstairs, a palace coup had just been drafted. She leaned back in, her chair, eyes half closed, but her mind sharper than ever. If they wanted to play a corporate coup, then she needed her own cards. The first thing she did, comb through the shareholder agreement. Buried in those dry legal paragraphs were clauses that looked meaningless but could explode like landmines under anyone who tried to oust her. For instance, the CEO's veto power over senior executive appointments. Most people overlooked it, but she hadn't forgotten. Next, she began rallying quiet allies. Not the slick suits at the top table, but the unsung ones, the head of engineering, the marketing lead, even longtime staff who had stuck with her back when the company was still operating out of a garage. They didn't hold major shares, but they held something else: loyalty. In management, this is called social capital, the invisible currency of trust and relationships. It doesn't show up on a balance sheet, but sometimes it's worth more than cash. A company doesn't just run on money and profits, it runs on belief and belonging, and she knew this better than anyone. One late evening, as the office lay silent, she walked the halls, past desks littered with papers and empty coffee mugs. All those people who had once shared the grind with her, when push came to shove, who would they stand with? She smirked and whispered to herself, "Fine. You want to play? I'll show you. This board still belongs to me." The following week, a company-wide meeting was held. Officially, it was just a quarterly review, but to her, it was a stage. The traitor squad thought they had everything lined up. She, however, was waiting for the perfect moment to strike. David, the CFO, opened the show. His slides were filled with pretty numbers, but carefully phrased lines slipped in. "We need a leadership transition to better match this new phase." Translation: CEO, start packing your bags. The room went dead quiet. A few curious eyes flicked toward her, waiting. But she didn't blow up, didn't slam the table. Instead, she smiled, a smile sharp enough to make her so-called allies squirm. Then she stood, walked straight to the screen, took the remote, and flipped to a slide. They hadn't prepared. Up popped a financial chart she had compiled herself, painstakingly detailed. But more importantly, highlighted in bold, was a clause from the shareholder agreement. The CEO retains absolute veto power over senior executive appointments. She turned to David, voice calm but cutting. "Perhaps you forgot this clause." "I haven't." The air thickened. A few employees smirked, the kind of smirk that said, "She just slapped him in the face." She closed with a line, part warning, part proclamation. "Leadership isn't a chair you grab when you want it. It's a responsibility. And right now, that responsibility is still mine." Her counterattack at the meeting had shifted the company's atmosphere. Employees whispered in corridors, some secretly cheering her move, others uneasy, sensing that a power struggle had officially erupted. And the traitors? Of course, they didn't back down. On the contrary, they doubled down. David, the CFO, who had nearly flushed red when she publicly humiliated him, no longer hid his resentment. He started whispering in employees' ears, spinning half-truths, claiming the CEO was losing control and that the company needed steadier hands. Sarah, the HR director, played a different game. Sweet smiles, friendly demeanor, but behind the scenes, she was gathering every complaint and grumble in the company. Every firm has them. Someone unhappy with pay, another burned out by pressure. Sarah compiled them all into a thick dossier to use as ammunition. In management, these tactics are known as internal sabotage. It's like termites eating away at a house. From the outside, the building still looks pristine. Inside, it's already rotting. She knew all of this. In fact, a loyal insider slipped her a handwritten note. David is arranging secret meetings with a few investors. She read it, smirked, and muttered, "Fine. If they want to play in the dark, I'll show them that light can be far more dangerous." In the startup world, power doesn't just sit in the CEO's chair. It lives in the hands of those who hold the money, the investors. They are the kings on the throne, and a founder is just a pawn unless she can prove her worth, and David knew that. He started whispering to a few venture capital funds, painting a picture. The current CEO is burned out, lacking vision. The company needs new leadership to break through. For investors, the story of replacing the CEO to boost value is hardly new. In fact, history is full of ousted founders. Steve Jobs in 1985 is the textbook case, pushed out of Apple by his own board over strategic clashes. One afternoon, she received an email from a major investor. "We'd like to discuss leadership direction further." That was a bad sign. Very bad one. She knew, if she lost investor confidence, then no matter how capable she was, her CEO seat would wobble. Money wasn't just the bloodline of the company. It was the weapon deciding who lives and who dies. But instead of panicking, she prepared. She began compiling data, growth reports, revenue numbers, customer retention rates, a metric showing how many customers keep coming back. Dry numbers, yes, but to investors, they were the only language that mattered. One line echoed in her mind. "If they want to tell stories with words, I'll tell mine with numbers." The investors' boardroom was perched on the top floor of a glass tower, the city below looking like a chessboard. She walked in, breathing deep, clutching a thick dossier in her hand. Across the table, the investors sat waiting. Their gazes were cold, calculating, as if every raised eyebrow could shift the company's valuation by tens of millions. And of course, David was there. He lounged back in his chair, as though this meeting were the trial he had orchestrated. 1. Investor spoke up. "We've heard there are leadership issues at your company. Employees are unhappy, direction unclear. Can you explain?" She smiled, not rushing to deny. She opened her dossier and presented the numbers. Quarterly revenue up 28%, customer retention at 72%, compared to the industry average of 60%. The new product line gained 15,000 users within 3 months. Her voice was steady, deliberate. "Numbers don't lie. If this is what poor leadership looks like, then I wish every company could suffer from it." The room chuckled lightly. Not everyone, but enough to make David's face stiffen. Then she struck again. "Yes, some employees are unhappy. But let me be clear. It's not about vision. It's about certain individuals deliberately sowing doubt. And I trust you're smart enough to know the difference between truth and rumor." A silence hung in the air. An older investor frowned, tapping his pen on the table, then finally said, "She has a point. We invest in numbers, not in whispers." She straightened, her gaze drilling into David. In her mind, a small victory, but enough to hold the Battlefield. When the investor meeting ended, she thought she had at least bought some balance. But the traders weren't done. They shifted strategy. If they couldn't defeat her with numbers, they'd smear her with image. A week later, an anonymous article appeared in a major business journal. Tech CEO accused of abusing power, employees, claimed toxic workplace. She smirked at the headline. She knew this play too well. Spin media, manipulating the press. In PR, it's a classic move. You don't need proof, you just plant enough doubt and let the public fill in the blanks. On social media, anonymous accounts began circulating insider stories, the CEO screaming at staff, chasing fame, neglecting company culture. No evidence, but it spread like wildfire. What stung most was seeing a former employee, someone she had once helped, adding comments, pouring fuel on the flames. That's business for you. Loyalty can take years to build, but one malicious rumor can burn it all down overnight. But instead of breaking down, she struck back differently. She began writing a personal blog, sharing her startup journey, the sleepless nights, the loneliness of being a CEO. No defenses, no excuses. Just raw truth. In marketing, this is called authentic branding, showing unfiltered reality. And it worked. Unexpectedly, many people, especially young women, rallied behind her. They said, "At least she tells it like it is," unlike those CEOs who hide behind polished speeches. She realized then, this battle wasn't just about numbers or boardrooms anymore. It had moved to a new battlefield, the war for public trust. The media storm could have drowned any CEO, but instead of sinking, she decided to ride the wave and use it as a launchpad. Her first move wasn't to hire a flashy PR firm, but to take control of the narrative. In media, that's the golden rule. If you don't tell your story, someone else will, on their terms, not yours. She appeared on a popular startup podcast. No polish, no scripted spin. She talked about eating instant noodles in the early days, about borrowing money to buy a second-hand laptop to write her first line of code, and about the moment she almost quit after an investor sneered, "A black woman CEO? I'd rather throw my money out the window." The story spread like wildfire. Not because she was a CEO, but because she dared to speak the raw truth so many others hide. People saw their own struggles reflected in hers. Next, she launched a modest but powerful campaign. Instead of pouring money into ads, she highlighted customer case studies, real stories of how her fintech product helped a small shop track its revenue or how a student paid tuition more easily. In business, this is called social proof. People can doubt a CEO, but it's hard to deny the lived experiences of satisfied customers. Within weeks, the tide began to turn. Media headlines shifted from tyrannical CEO to resilient CEO. Loyal customers spoke out in defense of the company. The smear pieces lost traction. She smiled. This was only the first counterstrike. The war was far from over, but for now, she had regained the initiative. Her counterattack in the media had rattled the traders. But failure didn't make them stop. It only made them more desperate. David, his face icy, whispered to Sarah, "If she wins out there, we'll make her lose in here." And so, they began setting traps inside the company. First, a few accidentally leaked emails appeared. Carefully clipped and edited, they made it look as though she was playing favorites, bypassing hiring protocols. In reality, those were special cases. When the company urgently needed talent, she bent the rules. But twisted in enemy hands, they became proof of her lack of transparency. Next, a critical project suddenly suffered a mistake. Financial data entered wrong, showing losses on the report. This was no accident. In the industry, this tactic is called poisoning the well, deliberately contaminating one part so the entire system loses credibility. The board began frowning, and some members even asked outright, "Are you sure the company is on track? These look like serious issues." She knew this wasn't about numbers. It was theater. And the hardest part of corporate politics is this. You can't scream, "I'm being sabotaged," because the moment you do, you've already lost. Instead, she stayed calm, quietly gathering evidence. Every email, every system log, every tiny trace was checked, and one line echoed in her mind. "You want to set traps? Fine, but don't forget, I play chess better than all of you." That day's board meeting felt like a courtroom. David and Sarah sat across from her, their eyes gleaming with confidence, as if ready to deliver the final blow. One board member began. "We've received reports of internal misconduct, non-transparent hiring, financial misreporting. CEO, can you explain?" She nodded slightly. Instead of rushing to defend herself, she opened her laptop and projected it on the screen. First came the leaked emails. But this time, not the clipped fragments, the full originals, complete with timestamps and system logs. And in them, it was David himself who had approved the special hire, not her. The room erupted in whispers. David's face flushed crimson, stammering. That was an emergency situation. She smiled and cut him off. An emergency? Interesting, because it was also you who edited these emails to make me look guilty. Next, she displayed system logs showing exactly who had altered the financial data at 2 a.m. on Friday night. The name glared back at everyone. Sarah Johnson, HR Director. The room exploded. Some board members gawked, others murmured. An older one sighed heavily. "This is disgraceful." She stood tall, her voice calm but razor sharp. "You've heard enough rumors. Today, I bring evidence. And the evidence shows the problem isn't the CEO. It's those willing to sabotage this company just to feed their own ambition." The boardroom went dead silent. In their eyes, she saw it, trust, slowly returning. And in that moment, she knew the board had tilted in her favor. After that board meeting, the company was buzzing. Word spread like wildfire. The CEO had flipped the game, exposing the truth right in front of the board. Many employees quietly texted congratulations, some whispering, "She's not someone you can take down that easily." David and Sarah were another story. Walking out of the boardroom, their faces were stone. They knew they had lost a battle. But this wasn't the whole war. That night, in an upscale bar, David slammed his glass down, venom dripping from his voice. "She thinks it's over? No. If she can't be beaten in the boardroom, we'll take her down elsewhere." Sarah nodded, eyes glinting with malice. "She may look clean in the board's eyes, but the public? That's another matter. One dirty strike, and it all crumbles." In business, this tactic has a name: character assassination. It doesn't attack strategy or numbers. It goes after the person, their private life, their dignity. And once the public doubts you, truth often stops mattering. Meanwhile, she sat alone in her office, staring out at the city lights. She knew the war wasn't over. If her company was a castle, the outer walls had just been reinforced, but the enemy was tunneling underneath. She whispered to herself, "Fine, let them come. I've survived startups, hunger, humiliation. A few dirty tricks won't scare me now." One morning, as she walked into the office, she noticed the buzz immediately. The lobby TV blared breaking news. Tech CEOs' private scandals exposed, affairs, ambition, and secrets behind the glass walls. She froze. A dirty strike. Exactly. As she'd predicted, the article painted her as a ruthless woman neglecting family, even hinting at an inappropriate relationship with a major investor. All fabricated. But the press doesn't need truth. They just need a story juicy enough to grab clicks. On social media, the hashtag #JewToxicCEO exploded. Anonymous accounts dropped leaked photos, clumsy Photoshop jobs that the drama-hungry public happily swallowed as evidence. A young employee rushed over, panicked. "CEO, what are you going to do? They're attacking you everywhere." She inhaled deeply, smirked. "Don't worry. If they want to turn me into the center of drama, I'll give them a show worth watching. In PR, it's called crisis management. But to her, this wasn't just a crisis. It was a chance to flip the script if she could turn mud into gold. Normally, when a CEO is hit with scandal, the first instinct is to issue a press release denying everything, but not her. She understood one iron law of media. The louder you deny, the more people assume you're hiding something. Instead of shouting, "I'm innocent," she appeared on a popular talk show. The host cut straight to the point. "There are rumors you had an inappropriate relationship with an investor. What do you say to that?" The studio fell silent. She didn't flinch. She smiled calmly. "Yes, I have a relationship. The only relationship a CEO should have, a relationship built on results. Investors don't care about romance. They care about numbers, and our company's numbers speak louder than any rumor." The audience laughed, then erupted in applause. In one move, she had turned a trap question into a spotlight on her achievements. After the talk show, she went further, opening her office doors to journalists, letting them tour the workplace, talk to employees, see the culture for themselves. No defenses, no walls. In PR, this is called a transparency play. When you've got nothing to hide, smear campaigns lose their grip. The result? New headlines. From scandal to stats, CEO proves herself with transparency. And the hashtag, toxic CEO, was quickly drowned out by a new one. Resilient CEO. If the media couldn't take her down, they turned to another weapon, one every business leader dreads, the law. One morning, her lawyer brought the news. A complaint has been filed. With regulators, they're accusing you of abuse of power and audit violations. She raised an eyebrow, unsurprised. This was the next move. In business, it's known as lawfare, legal warfare. You don't need to prove guilt. You just need to drag someone into endless litigation, draining time, money, and most dangerously, investor confidence. David and Sarah knew her company's weak spot. It was entering its next funding round, Series C. Even the whisper of legal trouble could spook investors, freeze capital, and suffocate the company before she had a chance to prove her innocence. At an emergency board meeting, one member asked, "We need a contingency plan. If the CEO is under investigation, who will step in as interim?" The air grew heavy. She scanned the room, eyes meeting stares, half doubtful, half fearful. Then she stood, voice firm and unwavering. "An investigation? Good. I'll cooperate fully. Because when the truth comes out, the only people who should worry aren't me." The room fell silent. A few couldn't hide their smiles. Her words weren't just a defense, they were a dare. The investigation began like a storm. Independent. Auditors swarmed the office, combing through every invoice, every expense report. The press stalked her, cameras flashing whenever she stepped out of the building. For most CEOs, this would be a nightmare. For her, it was just another battlefield. Each day, she lived two lives. By day, she was the CEO, running meetings, signing contracts, answering emails. By night, she was with her lawyers, combing through details, building a case for counterattack. Sleep was gone. Only coffee and willpower kept her moving. The media kept churning headlines. CEO under investigation. Can the company survive? Stock prices dipped slightly on the OTC market. Some investors grew nervous, calling constantly, "We need reassurance. What's really going on?" She never dodged. She told them plainly, "Yes, we're under investigation, but I have nothing to hide. And this company will keep growing because truth is on my side." In business, this approach is called playing offense in defense, attacking even while defending. She refused to act like a victim, turning the investigation itself into a chance to prove transparency. One late night, alone in the darkened office, she stared at the glowing city. A single thought echoed. They think they can bury me in mud? Fine, I'll turn that mud into cement and build another floor on this castle. The investigation dragged on for weeks, leaving the company in a state of holding its breath. Employees spoke in hushed tones, afraid every email might be scrutinized. But for her, this was the moment to stay sharp. One night, reviewing system data with her lawyers, she stumbled across something strange. In the financial report accused of being manipulated, a system log showed edits coming from an account that had been deactivated months earlier. Her eyes narrowed. That meant someone had illegally reactivated access to alter the data. In tech, this is known as backdoor access, a hidden pathway into the system. Digging deeper into the security logs, a name surfaced, a former IT employee once close to David. He had left the company, but his account had been exploited to make the changes. She leaned back in her chair, heart pounding. This was the missing piece, proof that the report was deliberately falsified, not a random error. The next morning, as she entered the office, she saw David standing there, wearing his usual stone-cold mask. But to her eyes now, he was no longer the predator. He was prey, cornered by his own trap. She thought to herself, "The game's about to flip, and this time I won't just defend, I'll strike." With evidence in hand, she knew she was holding a dagger aimed straight at the traitors' hearts. But in business, power doesn't just lie in what you have, it lies in when you use it. She didn't rush to reveal it. If she laid everything out now, the traitors would have time to spin, to counter. Instead, she let them feel confident a little, longer, digging themselves deeper into their own pit. Over the next few weeks, David and Sarah kept fanning the flames. They whispered to the board that the CEO was losing credibility, that the company needed an interim leadership team. The more they spoke, the more convinced they became that they held the upper hand. Meanwhile, she quietly built her plan. First, she had her lawyers validate the evidence legally. System logs, proof of backdoor access, the connection to the former IT employee. All sealed, signed, airtight. Next, she courted allies on the board, the ones who cared more about the company's survival than politics. She shared part of the truth with them, just enough to let them know a bombshell is coming, without giving away everything. And finally, she called for a company-wide board meeting. The official agenda? Update on the investigation. But in her mind, it would be a public trial, where truth would explode and the traitors would have nowhere left to run. In the reflection of the boardroom glass, she studied herself. Still the black woman who once built a startup from scratch, but now her eyes held the sharp, unyielding fire of a warrior. She whispered softly, "All right, let's see who's really about to be shocked." The boardroom was packed that day. Members sat stiff, eyes heavy with tension. The media still prowled outside, but inside this room the company's future and her career would be decided. David kicked things off, his voice dripping with smug confidence. "We've seen too. Many system failures. I propose forming an interim leadership team until the investigation concludes." Some nodded. Sarah sat beside him, face icy, as if everything had already been sealed. She stayed silent for a moment, then calmly stood. Every eye followed her. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her tone steady, "we've heard enough accusations. Today I bring evidence." Slide 1 lit up, a system log. It showed a deactivated account illegally reactivated to make edits. Slide 2, the timeline of financial data changes, and then a name in black and white. A former IT employee, once working directly under David. The room rippled with whispers. A board member frowned. This is internal data tampering?" She didn't answer, but clicked to slide 3, a chain of emails. In them, Sarah directed staff to send a revised report to the board, without CEO approval. The air turned heavy. David's mouth fell open. Sarah's face drained of color. Finally, she delivered the strike. You've heard rumors. Now you see truth. And the truth shows, it isn't this CEO sabotaging the company. It's those right here, willing to betray it for ambition. The boardroom froze. An older member slowly nodded, voice low but firm. I think we now see who the real problem is. The boardroom air was thick enough to cut. David stammered, voice trembling. This must be a misunderstanding. I never authorized this. But all eyes were on him. The evidence was too clear. The ex-IT account, the email chain, the data logs. There was no room left for denial. Sarah tried a different approach. She kept her face composed, but her trembling hands on the table betrayed her. A board member turned and asked point blank, Ms. Johnson, do you deny these emails are yours? Sarah pressed her lips together, silent, and silence, in that moment, was as good as confession. A wave of murmurs swept through the room. Then the chairman spoke, voice cold as steel. This board will not tolerate internal sabotage. David, Sarah, you will submit full explanations within 48 hours. Effective immediately. Your decision-making powers are suspended. The words struck like a gavel. David dropped his gaze. Sarah went pale. The CEO, meanwhile, sat tall, her eyes calm. She didn't need to celebrate. Trust was already flowing back to her. The board no longer looked at her with suspicion, but with respect. Inside, she whispered to herself, the balance has shifted, and this is only the beginning. After that historic meeting, the company seemed to breathe again. News of David and Sarah's suspension spread quickly, employees whispering like they'd just witnessed an earthquake in leadership. Some even smiled in relief. Finally, justice had a place, but she knew this wasn't a total victory. The traitors had lost their seats, but their influence lingered. A handful of staff loyal to David quietly resisted, while the press hovered like vultures, waiting for her next stumble. She dove straight into rebuilding, first order of business, restoring employee trust. She organized an open town hall where anyone could ask the CEO questions directly, no filters, no middlemen. No flashy stage, just a microphone, a screen, and her standing in the center of a circle of employees. A young engineer stood, voice trembling. Can you promise us the company won't face another leadership crisis? I want to believe, but I'm scared. She met his eyes and answered firmly. I can't promise there will never be storms, but I can promise that from now on, if there's a storm, I'll be the first one standing in front of it. The room fell silent for a beat, then erupted in applause, not because her words were pretty, but because they were true. In management, this is known as servant leadership, leading by serving. When employees see their leader willing to stand on the front line, that's when loyalty takes root. She knew rebuilding the fortress wouldn't come from policies and protocols alone. It would be built brick by brick with trust. And she had just laid the first stone. Right after the town hall, she didn't let time slip away. One mistake CEOs often make is thinking trust comes from speeches. No, trust only exists when backed by action. And she decided to begin with a full-scale restructuring. She ordered a review of the entire management hierarchy. Positions that had been backrooms for David and Sarah were dissolved. Departments once divided were merged under leaders with real performance records, not just political maneuvering. In management, this is known as cleaning the house. Painful, but necessary, because if rotten foundations aren't fixed, the castle will eventually collapse. But she didn't stop at removal. At the same time, she unveiled a new growth strategy, expanding the fintech platform into education and healthcare. If we can help a small shop manage its revenue, she said, we can also help a school manage tuition or a hospital manage treatment costs. Employees listened, eyes bright. This was no longer a company on the defensive, it was a company reborn. A senior manager whispered, "She's not just keeping the CEO's seat, she's turning crisis into opportunity." And that was exactly her plan. Within just a few months, the seeds of her new strategy had begun to sprout. The fintech product for schools was piloted at 3 institutions, helping thousands of parents pay tuition online. No more chaotic lines at the office. In healthcare, a major hospital signed on to use the platform for managing expenses and insurance payments. The media changed its tone. Where they once chased scandal, now the headlines brimmed with admiration. From storm to pioneer, Black CEO turns crisis into innovation. Inside the office, employees worked with renewed energy. The tense atmosphere of the investigation days had given way to confidence. One engineer whispered in the hallway, "Now I believe we're building something truly big." But just as the company was reborn, the shadow of betrayal returned, this time from outside. David and Sarah, stripped of power inside, hadn't disappeared. They quietly approached a few competitors, whispering, "This is the best time to strike. That company may look strong, but its wounds haven't healed." In business, this is called competitive sabotage, undermining by arming. Rivals. A knife from outside, aimed at an organization still scarred from within, could be deadly. Word of it reached her through a trusted source. She only smiled, whispering to herself, "Haven't they learned anything? Let them try. I'm ready for the next round." Just as she'd been warned, weeks later, a major competitor in fintech suddenly launched a massive media blitz. They promoted a brand new platform with features almost identical to hers. Only they had the budget to plaster it everywhere: newspapers, billboards, even subway stations. She knew instantly. David and Sarah's fingerprints were on this. No rival could move that fast, that precisely, without inside intel. Her company's sales immediately felt the strain. Some prospective clients paused contracts, saying they wanted to consider other options. The media began speculating, can the Black CEO withstand this new wave of competition? In a strategy meeting, a senior manager fretted, "They've got too much money. If we fight them head-to-head in ads, we'll lose before the race even begins." She stayed silent, then chuckled softly. "Exactly. Which is why we won't fight them in ads. They have money. But we have something money can't buy, the trust of real customers." She rolled out a different tactic: storytelling marketing. Instead of flashy campaigns, the company released videos of real customers, shop owners, students, hospitals, sharing how the platform had changed their lives. The stories spread fast. Audiences stopped caring about flashy banners and started listening to lived experiences. Slowly, public opinion shifted. The competitor has big ads, but she has proof. Back in her office, hearing reports of rising sign-ups, her eyes gleamed sharp as steel. They want to play the outside game? Fine. But remember, I'm best at turning adversity into my counterstrike. The fintech market had turned into a public arena. Newspapers, tech blogs, even financial TV shows obsessed over comparing the two rivals. On one side, the wealthy competitor with flashy ad campaigns. On the other, her company, led by the Black CEO who had just weathered a storm. Everyone was waiting for someone to fall, and the press thrived on the drama. One sensational headline read, "CEO Showdown, Who Will Survive?" The competitor kept pouring money to Project Dominance, but she knew money wasn't the only weapon. She chose a bold strategy, publicly, releasing the company's operating data. At a press conference, she displayed it all: growth rates, customer retention, positive user feedback. Not glossy slides, but raw, unpolished numbers. "This," she declared, "is the difference. We don't sell illusions, we sell trust." The room went silent for a beat, then erupted in applause. The media pivoted instantly. Instead of comparing, Ad campaigns, they started comparing transparency. And this time, the competitor, used to hiding their real figures, stumbled. In business, this is called radical transparency. A double-edged sword, yes, but in the right moment, it cuts sharper than anything else. She understood now. This battle was no longer just about market share. It was a battle for public trust. And on that front, she held the advantage. Her bold release of company data had won back public trust. But it also enraged her competitor. Advertising alone was no longer enough, so they turned to a more dangerous weapon: political and media alliances. Within weeks, a series of articles appeared, not attacking her product, but attacking her identity. Malicious headlines screamed, "Is a black CEO fit to lead the finance industry?" And political risks of a woman at the helm. This was no longer simple business rivalry. It was a war of prejudice. They exploited deep-rooted biases to plant seeds of doubt. And in politics, doubt alone is often enough. One evening, her lawyer brought grim news. A congressman is pushing for hearings on transparency in your company's operations. Clearly, someone's pulling strings. She drew a deep breath. It was a brutal move, because even without proof of wrongdoing, just the image of a CEO being called to testify could shake public confidence. But she didn't flinch. Staring out at the glowing city, she whispered, "If they want to make me a symbol to attack, then I'll make that very symbol my weapon." In media strategy, this is known as flipping the narrative, turning the story upside down. And she knew the coming moment would decide whether she became a victim or a role model. On the day of the hearing, the congressional hall was packed. Cameras pointed straight at her, reporters jostled, live tweets flying like sparks or comb. Many CEOs, this would be a disaster. For her, it was a stage. An older congressman, voice sharp as steel, opened. "There are allegations your company lacks transparency in financial reporting. How do you explain this?" She didn't dodge. She displayed the public data her company had already released, stressing that it was independently audited. Then she spoke slowly. "Sir, transparency isn't just an obligation. It's a strategic choice, and we've chosen the harder path, to lay everything open." The room murmured. Some lawmakers exchanged glances. Then came the cutting question. "Some argue that a black woman like you cannot remain objective in such a fiercely competitive financial sector. What do you say to that?" The hall fell silent. It was a personal strike. She smiled faintly. "I think, if I could survive poverty, survive rejection just because of my skin and gender, and still build a company serving millions, then I'm objective enough to say this: competence doesn't lie in color or gender, it lies in results." Applause broke out from parts of the audience, though not everyone agreed. But the media exploded instantly. Black CEO turns hearing into a lesson on resilience. She knew she had just flipped the board. Instead of the accused, she had become an inspiration, on her enemy's own stage. The hearing ended, but its shockwaves rippled across headlines everywhere. Social media exploded with millions of comments, half scoffed, accusing her of playing the emotion card. But the other half roared, calling her the voice of resilience. The hashtag #AllResilientCEO shot to the top of trending. Clips of her declaring competence doesn't lie in color or gender, it lies in results, spread like wildfire, turning into an inspirational quote shared across LinkedIn, Twitter, and international press. Meanwhile, on the competitor's side, the atmosphere was chaos. David and Sarah, the masterminds behind this ploy, were in panic. An ally called, shouting, "You tried to sabotage her, and instead you made her a hero. You've shot yourselves in the foot." In business, this is known as the backfire effect. When an attack is too blatant or unfair, the public doesn't just reject it, they rally to defend the target. And now, she wasn't just a CEO anymore. She was becoming a social symbol. Back in her office, she read a message from a student. "Thank you. I never thought I'd see someone like me stand in Congress and say those words." She smiled. This victory wasn't just for her company. It was for everyone who had ever been underestimated. She whispered to herself, "They wanted me to be a victim, but I became a symbol, and that's something money or power can never buy." After the hearing, she was no longer just an entrepreneur. She had become a symbol. International media invited her to speak. Global conferences on tech and finance sent her constant invitations. On stage in Switzerland, at the World Economic Forum, she spoke about transparency and trust in business. The audience rose in a standing ovation. People called her the Black woman redefining leadership in the digital age. That image brought not only personal glory, but also business opportunities. Global corporations approached her company for partnerships, opening doors to international markets. The future had never looked brighter, but she knew, the brighter the light, the darker the shadow. David and Sarah, though ousted, hadn't vanished. From outside, they were aligning with new enemies, international rivals, powerful forces that didn't want to see her become a global role model. One night, as the city slept, her lawyer placed a thick folder on her desk. There are signs they're preparing an international lawsuit. This could be the biggest legal battle yet. She stared at the stack, eyes unshaken. "Fine," she whispered. "If this is the final fight, then I'll make it the battle that defines my entire legacy." In leadership, this is known as a legacy moment, not just proving yourself, but leaving a mark for the generations to come. Forky. International lawsuit exploded like a bomb. Headlines worldwide screamed, "Black CEO faces global legal battle." The International Trade Court in Geneva became a stage the world couldn't look away from. David and Sarah, now like ghosts pulling strings, had allied with a massive multinational corporation, one eager to crush her company and seize the market. They accused her firm of technology infringement, waving stacks of forged documents to destroy her credibility. At the first hearing, the opposing lawyers cited complex clauses, burying the court in piles of paperwork. It was the classic tactic. Overwhelmed by paperwork, drown the opponent in legalese. She sat still, unshaken. When her turn came, she and her team unleashed their counter: system logs, notarized legal copies, and most damning of all, a video testimony from the former IT employee admitting he had been bribed by David to tamper with data. The courtroom erupted. Murmurs filled the air. An elderly judge leaned into his microphone, asking bluntly, "Are we witnessing an organized sabotage attempt against a legitimate CEO?" She met his gaze, her voice clear. "This isn't just about undermining me. This is a textbook case of how ambition and prejudice can destroy innovation. And if we allow it, then not just my company, but anyone who dares to be different will be the next victim." In that moment, she knew she wasn't just defending her firm. She was standing for every young leader, every woman, every person ever dismissed for being different. The Geneva trial stretched on for days, and the scales tipped further and further in her favor. The evidence was undeniable: system data, testimony, and proof that her rivals had bribed insiders. The press shifted tone. Black CEO stands tall amid global storm. But David and Sarah weren't about to surrender. If they couldn't win, in the light, they would strike from the shadows. One late night, her close aide rushed in, panicked, clutching an anonymous folder. "They're leaking claims you once had personal debt and used company funds to pay it off." She scanned the papers, barely frowning. This was clearly a smear campaign, attacks outside the courtroom. No need for real proof, just enough to poison public perception. The next day, a few tabloids ran the story, splashing blurry, doctored photos. But this time, she didn't dance to their dirty tune. Instead, she went on the offensive, releasing her personal financial records, transparent down to the last cent. "This is me," she said at a press conference. A woman who once lived with just $23 in her account, but never took a single company dollar for herself. If you want verification, hire any independent auditor. I have nothing to hide. The room erupted, her radical transparency shattered. The smear in seconds. Global outlets headlined, "From Smear to Clear, CEO turns dirt into power." When David and Sarah heard, their faces went pale. They had played their final card, only to make her shine brighter. Judgment Day in Geneva carried an almost electric tension. International media crammed the courthouse halls, cameras streaming live worldwide. All eyes fixed on the decisive moment. The presiding judge read aloud, "The court finds the allegations of copyright infringement baseless. Evidence proves this was an organized sabotage attempt against a legitimate CEO. The plaintiff shall bear all litigation costs." The defendant company, cleared of all charges. The chamber erupted in applause. Reporters rushed out, typing furiously, "Black CEO wins landmark victory in Geneva." She sat still, hands clenched, then relaxed. This wasn't just a legal win. It was a victory for resilience, for trust, for transparency. The next day, her image covered the front pages of global newspapers, "The woman who turned betrayal into legacy." From New York to Tokyo, London to Lagos, people talked about her, not just as a CEO, but as a new model of leadership. In her final speech, she stood before thousands of students. "Remember this, they can steal your reputation in a day, but they cannot steal the truth. And if you stand by the truth, in the end, it is the truth that will carry you to victory." The crowd rose, clapping thunderously, many with tears in their eyes. She smiled. The journey of betrayal, storms, and dirty tricks had finally become a legacy. A legacy not just hers, but one for everyone who had ever been dismissed, underestimated, told they couldn't. The story of that black woman CEO has come to an end, but its echoes will never fade. She didn't just win a lawsuit or save her company from betrayal. She rewrote what leadership means, where transparency, resilience, and courage outweigh any scheme, prejudice, or political ploy. From a broke single mom, from sleepless nights on the verge of collapse, she rose, turning adversity into counterstrike, betrayal into legacy. And her message to us is crystal clear. Don't fear betrayal. Don't despair when you're underestimated. Sometimes, the very wounds you carry become the wings that lift you higher. Viewers may leave this video with a satisfied grin, a tear in their eye, or a renewed belief in themselves. But one thing is certain. You'll never look at a CEO, especially a black woman CEO, the same way again. And remember, this is just one story. Out there are hundreds, thousands more, journeys full of suspense, drama, and inspiration, waiting to be told. So make sure to subscribe to this channel, because here, every video isn't just a story, it's an experience.